not been able to make it. But we will also be sending out a follow-up email with some information for you all. So I just wanted to first read a land acknowledgement because USC Sea Grant conducts our work in and throughout the Southern California Bight. So the Southern California Bight is located on the unceded, sacred, and traditional lands of the Tongva, Ajashaman, and Chumash nations, the First Native peoples, and they are the original stewards of this land and continue in this role today. So for those of you who may not be very familiar with Sea Grant, USC Sea Grant, or our AdaptLA program, our program is a federal state university partnership that integrates research, education, and outreach with a specific focus on the urban ocean and solving issues arising out of managing people and natural resources in such an intensely urbanized and developed coastline. So AdaptLA connects local coastal jurisdictions with the best available scientific tools and develops a community of practice for the LA region's adaptation planning. So one of the ways we do this is through webinars like the one today. So today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Essam Heggy talk to you all about the current state and challenges of beach nourishment and beach erosion in Southern California. Dr. Heggy is a research scientist at the Microwave Systems, Sensors, and Imaging Lab here at the Viterbi School of Engineering at USC. And he's an affiliate of the Radar Science and Engineering section at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So I'll now pass it over to Essam, and we'll have a little bit of a Q&A portion after his presentation. So thank you for joining us today, Essam, and I will hand the floor over to you.
Okay, many thanks everyone for being here, and many thanks for Rachel for the introduction. So today we're going to talk about something that is quite mysterious for many of us. It's quite interesting, and it's something we observe every day, which is basically the evolution of the coastline in Southern California. And what's the relation this have with the droughts? And what are the drivers that change the coastlines? And what are the mitigation to do this? So just a little introduction. A few years ago, 5 years ago, a friend of mine, she's born in Southern California, and she just took me by the beach in Newport Beach, and she showed me a place where she go for her childhood, and she showed me, look, this is the picture when I was 8 years old, and I love this beach, and it still remain my favorite place. However, in that picture, the beach was far away from the cliff, and the time where we were on that beach, the coastline was just few yards away. I would say 20-foot away from the cliff, which is mean that the coastline have recessed inland. So I was interested as a hydrologist and as a geophysicist, as a scientist working in remote sensing, to understand what's going on in Southern California. And we started a collaboration that I want to acknowledge here with my two collaborators in the Marine Institute in Tunisia, and I'll talk about it later. So first of all, we know that sea level rise control the coastline. We know that the storms control the morphology of our coastline. And I'll try to be very simplistic in my presentation here. And please, if you need more detail, let me know. So we all tend to think that sea level rise control our coastline, which is true. We all tend to think that the storms control our coastline, which is also true. But the big question is to how much these control the recess of our coastline, and what are the drivers which we really don't understand very well. And one is very important is the drought. Does drought have another impact on our coastline? And basically, I will explain here how droughts have a large impact on the shape of our coastline and the recession of our coastline, as well as the urbanization that is happening on the coastline has also an impact. So basically, we have a global increase. Our planet witnessed a global increase in temperature and a global increase in the average temperature. And Southern California is no exception to that. And as one of the impacts of this global warming is the extension of the droughts and the increase in the severity of these droughts. And then these droughts are succeeded by flash rains, which mean heavy rains and drought. So the impact of global warming on us in Southern California is materialized by a succession of droughts and heavy rain, droughts and heavy rain. And I will explain how these succession of these how these successions change our coastlines. So first of all, we observe that in the last 25 years, we have an increase in the number of days which we have drought in the Southwest in the continental US. So you can see on this figure here that as we go in time, we have increase of the severity of droughts, of several type of droughts, which is attributed to the global warming of our planet. Another thing we have is an increase in extreme rain event and in the evapotranspiration due to the increase in temperature. Now, these two have an important effect. These two have an impact effect that you lose the small vegetation that are in the watersheds. And then when you have rain, you have severe soil erosion, okay, that bring more or less sediments to the coastline, as we will talk about it in this presentation. And these change in the sedimentation process have a huge impact on how our coastline behave. However, we have a problem to understand the impact of droughts in California, very simply because we have a lot of anthropogenization in our landscape and urbanization. So one good place to start look at is areas who have the same climate as Southern California, which is the Southern Mediterranean basin, the countries of Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt, which have the same average temperature, more or less the same average precipitation in the north, and have a similar climate as what we see in California, and they go through droughts. So in a study we have in 2001, we indicated that the sandy beaches in North Africa, which are very similar to the sandy beaches in California, they are under extreme threat of coastal erosion due to the droughts and due to urbanization. So we found that about 20% of the coastal areas, which is here about 3,000 miles, have a very high, and 27 is high, which is mean if you combine these two, about 60% of this coastline is going moderate to high to very high coastal erosion. So understanding the driver of coastal erosion in this area and seeing what it does help us understand coastal erosion and see and the retreat of the coastline under drought condition, because these areas, they represent California when it goes under drought. Okay? So something very important to keep in mind that, as you know, the sand that we see at the beach is the result of the transport of the sand, of the soil erosion from inland. So if we don't have soil erosion, we don't have the sand at the beaches. If we have soil erosion, if this process is changed, it changed the amount of the sand we put at the beach, and and in such a way that the transport of sediment need to be the balance with with the coastline erosion. So you have these two processes: coastal erosion and the transport of the sediment inland. If these two processes they are uh, in in a balance, the coastline remain fixed. If the coastal erosion is stronger than the transport of the sand, which is coming from the inland, then you have the coastline retreat. So one of the things, one of the examples I want to show you, because people tend to think that when they see the change in the coastline, they tend to think immediately it's sea level rise. So we have a lot of these community who live at the coastline, and once they see something like this, for instance, which is in Tunisia, this is this collapsing house in 2009, and you see that in 2019 it is under the sea. What has happened, it's not that the sea level has rose, because you see you have these, the coast is still here. What happened is that coastal erosion went to the foundation of this house and collapsed the house, and now it is under the water. So you see, this is very important to understand that the visual we see in our coastline does not necessarily mean that the sea levels are rising. It does not necessarily mean that this is the force of climate change that is far in the future and that we have no control. Sometimes it means it's the way that our urbanization and the way that droughts convolute the effect of our urbanization act as strong as the sea level rise in changing the coastline. So we see similar examples in many places in North Africa. So for instance, this is a satellite image of the north of the delta of the Nile, which is here. And this is the image of 1974. And these are the sandy beaches, beautiful sandy beaches that used to exist in Egypt. And in 2019, they disappeared completely. And why they disappeared? Because the flow of the Nile is less rich in sediment, so there is less of the sand that is transported in this area, so the coast get eroded. In a similar way, we see in this area by the Canal of Suez, and you see this was the coastline in 1974, beautiful sandy beaches, and in 2019, it retreated about 200 meters. So this is two football field, the length of two football field you retreated in these few decades here. And this is not sea level rise. This is the change in sediment transport at the coastline. So in Southern California, Egypt, and Libya. So, of course, we are eluded by the gardening and the landscape and the vegetation, the pine trees, which most of them are transported and are exogenic to the landscape in Southern California. In fact, from pure landscape perspective, Southern California would be the largest landscaping that happen in any place of the planet because of all these exogenic the trees and vegetation which were brought to imitate the English backyards in a desert area, and that has a consequence which I'll talk about in this presentation. So what we did is that we took historical images of all the coastline of the Gulf of Santa Catalina, and we analyzed these images from 1992 to 2018, and we run a model which help us understand how the coast is retreating. And as you can see here in the Corona del Mar State Beach, is the place where my friends has took me to observe. So this was the coastline in 1992 when she was a teenager. And this is 2005, this is 2018. So you see that the coastline retreated 35-meter inland. Okay. And so the big question is why and how we can stop that. And what does that mean for the housing market and for the cost of living in areas where we observe these severe shoreline retreat? So we look to more historic images, and in general, we use a technique which basically use photogrammetric images, which mean optical images, historic one combined with new one, to see how the coastline is changing, and we combine that with the bathymetric maps, historic one and new one, and then we can make a reconstruction how the coastline has moved over decades, and that's very important. But more importantly, is to see how the urban landscape in Southern California have changed from few sparse houses, and you have these nourished beaches here with ample amount of sand, and how this disappeared when we started to have more housing in this place, which what they did is that they reduced the sediment the transport when it rains. So when it rains, as we build more cemented areas, there is less soil bare areas to generate the sand that will come and deposit here. So you can see we looked at this area that I'm showing here, and this is here is the difference between Corona del Mar in 1929 and 2018, basically 90 year, and look how the sandy beach changed here. This is the sandy beach in 1929. This is how it looked in 2018 with a lot of replenishment. Like these one in 1985, look the thickness of the beaches. They were thick. In 2018, they are very narrow beaches, which basically mean we lost about half of the thickness of these beaches to coastal erosion. Why? Because these houses that you see here, okay, they stop the transport from the sediment, which is coming from this high topographic area when it rains, and it can't reach the beach. So there are two factors that stop the sediment transport. First is the dense network of housing. And the second is the gardens in these houses with a lot of the grass, the backyard grass, the green grass, a lot of highly vegetated area. It contributes to less soil erosion. So it ends up by generating less of the sand transported to the beach. So this beautiful English garden, they somehow contribute to this soil erosion we see here. So the impact of this soil erosion is the coastal degradation and a risk on the infrastructure. It costs in the US, in the Southwest, about $500 million a year. And it costs in a place like Tunisia, 2.8 of the GDP. So this is here is in California, and this is here is in Tunisia. So you see like these houses, which are now where the waves hit the wall, these were about a football field away from the beach, but today they are at the beach. And so the problem is that when these beaches, these sandy beaches disappear, these sandy beaches, they are our line of defense against coastal flooding, against seawater intrusion in aquifer. And so when they disappear, the consequence is beyond people not finding place to take a sunbath at the sand. And often, sandy beaches are perceived by the population as a place for entertainment. They are not perceived as a line of defense against extreme environment. And that's what they are in semi-arid environments like the Mediterranean. And we've seen this coastal flooding happening in Spain and Tunisia and in Florida, as you see them here in these images. So was about 2 weeks ago. You see the vehicle transported in the streets of Tunisia, in the coastal areas, and you see also the destruction and coastal flooding, which is caused by the hurricane in California, in Florida, and the storm surge what it generated. And so, if you're not convinced that these beaches can be the separation between dead and life, between death and life, you have an example in Libya just a year ago, where a hurricane impacted the coastal city of Terna, which is city you see here, was a beautiful city, and then the coastal flooding took the life of 11,300 people overnight. It was the deadliest coastal flood ever happened in Africa. And as you see here, this mud and the coastal flood which happening, and a big part of that, as I show in the earlier in the studies, was of course attributed to precipitation, winds, and the collapsing of dams. All of that is true, but however, also the soil erosion and the disappearance of the beaches and sand erosion somehow contributed to the seawater intrusion in all of this area. The same thing happened in Spain. Okay, so in Spain, about a few weeks ago, we have all seen the deadly flood in Spain, and however, which has happened in this area. Let me try just to show it here. In the city of Valencia, and however, you see that the city is protected, this lowland, by this lagoon of sand. And as this lagoon of sand has also been heavily eroded, it was not able to stop a lot of the coastal flooding of the storm surge. And you've seen the storm surge entered all of this area, okay, which is, I mean, about 4 times the size of the city of Valencia. So again, just to show when you lose these sandy beaches, the size of the destruction that happened in a city like Derna was half destructed by the storm surge in September of last year, and a big part of it, as I said, because of the change in the coastal morphology and the disappearance of the sandy beaches, in addition to many factors, as I said, as the collapsing of the dams, the strength of the storm. It's a convolution of factors that led to this disaster. So what we did is that we took the rate of coastal erosion, and we took the projected rate of the sea level rise, and we calculated what will be the shoreline retreat for the next 30 years and for the next 80 years in Southern California. So the measured part, today we observe a shoreline retreat that range from 1 meter to a couple of tens of centimeters. However, in 2050, it will be on average about 1 meter a year. And 1 meter a year, it's a lot on the coastline. So this is a surface that is measured and has, of course, an impact on the stability of the cliffs and the infrastructure on the coastline. So in average, we will be in average by 2050, we will see a losses that will be in about here. And
Sorry, can you hear me? I think we're losing
oh,
you a
I've
little
got
bit.
here. Hmm?
I think we lost you for maybe 30
Oh,
seconds there, if you don't mind repeating. I think if you would want to turn off your camera, I think that might save some of your
okay.
bandwidth if you're interested in that. But yeah, if you don't mind repeating just like the last couple
Yes.
sentences. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So our result shows that for the next 25 years, we will observe a coastline retreat from 1.5 to 2 meter, okay, by 2050, and 3 meter by 2100. So let's forget about this. Let's just focus on 2050. If you buy a house today, your mortgage is anything from 15 to 25 years. So in 25 years, by the time you pay your mortgage, your coastline would have retreated about 50 meters. So if you bought this house, you did not make a good deal. Okay. Your coastline is gonna retreat. So the beautiful house by the beach today, it can be the nightmare for your retirement. Nothing like being retired. You paid your house, and now you are being ditched in the sea. So that's a scenario that many of us would like to avoid. So then, how can we stop this? Okay. Well, the only way to stop this um, is right now what we do is the beach nourishment. So there is a lot of beach nourishment in Southern California, like in the summer. This is in San Clemente. But the problem of beach nourishment is two things. First, it's very expensive, and the price of the sand is getting more expensive. And there is also an emotional factor that you are sitting on a sand that's coming from somewhere else. So you're not really on it's have a psychological feeling. It also have an environmental impact that beach nourishment has an impact on the biodiversity of the coastline. And this increase in the volume of beach nourishment in Southern California will triple by 2050, which is mean that whatever amount we use today, we have to triple that when you start to pay off your house. And somebody has to pay for that. So probably whether that the locality will have to increase the taxes, whether that the government have to the state have to step in to cover these fees. In any way, the cost will jump from right today, the beach nourishment, the cost per 1 kilometer, which is less than a mile, okay, about half a mile, is 24,000 US dollars, so 25,000 US dollars. In 2050, this amount will be multiplied by five. It's going to be about 125,000 US dollar per kilometer. Okay, so this is a lot. Will be very expensive, and this funds will mean that the cost of living in this area somehow has to find this millions of dollars required to replenish the coastline. So what we plan to do in the future is that we plan to propose natural-based solution that combine beach nourishment with the establishment uh, 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 of a dune of sand, which is basically restore the coastal dunes who have disappeared. So long time ago, these coastal dunes existed, okay, and today they disappeared because of the coastal erosion and because of the storms and many things. So we need to stabilize these coastal dunes. We need to regenerate these coastal dunes and make these submarine bars that we see here. And we need to create artificial reefs and regenerate the coastal wetlands which disappear. So we need to restore our coastline to how it was before the heavy impact of urbanization that eroded everything we see here and increased the vulnerability we have to collapses. Now, remember, every time you think, oh, will not happen. Every time somebody say, oh, I've been in California all my life, I mean, this thing is exaggeration. Every time these words, it comes to your mind, please remember that those 11,300 people who died in Libya, that Libya is not the wettest place on earth. It is actually the driest place on earth. And the mortality from coastal floods outpaced wars, geopolitical instability, earthquakes, everything. So there are more people who died drowned in the Sahara from coastal floods, and more of them in Spain than any time in our history. And we share every hydroclimatic similarity with these places. And we need to spread the awareness of these risks. So if the time will come that we have to confront these risks, that people do not undermine the safety instruction and do not undermine the requirement for building houses in these area of high vulnerability, and stop thinking, maybe people think that sea level rise, it's somehow far in the future. Yes, sea level rise is far in the future, but coastal erosion is here, and it has as much impact as sea level rise in the degradation of the coastal properties in Southern California. And that's all. So please let me know if you have any question.
Thanks so much, Essam. Um, yeah, so we can take some comments in the chat, but also if you'd like to raise your hand via Zoom, we can call on you as well, Essam. If you see any raised hands or anything, feel free to
Okay,
call.
we have Natasha Kumar. So Natasha, do you want to go and ask your question?
Oh, sorry. I wasn't trying to ask a question. I was just using the applause um
Okay,
emoji
okay,
because you finished presenting. So I was
okay. Many thanks,
virtually
Natasha.
clapping my hands. Sorry.
Thanks a lot. So let's see in the chat. Okay, we have comments in the chat here. Uh, okay, okay. So we have three shoreline dates were used. A few comments here. Three shoreline dates were used for these erosion measurements. If larger or longer dates are used, example coastline database, USGS, national assessment, the region in question is not eroding. Beach have accreted over the long and short term, and then there is reference. Okay, so these are not three dates. We used the ZAS model and we generated the coastline through from 1982 to 2018. And so the accretion, yes, there are areas who have been through accretions and other areas who have been through erosion. So yes, there are areas with accretion which we identify in our proposal, and others who have seen erosion. So we cannot make just one statement that it's all the shoreline which is eroding or all of it is accreting, to my knowledge. Okay, and then more urbanization often results in more sediment in Southern California watershed. Okay, this is the opposite to what is presented. So the phenomena by which urbanization can generate more sediments and the contradiction with other publications all depend what we are looking at. It's all depend what we are looking at. So, in particular, we are looking here to the change in the land use, and I see this reference is in 1979. So we have seen a huge change in the land use from 2000, with more cemented areas that cover the coastline of the Santa Catalina Bay. So I invite you to look at the paper we have, and maybe we missed something here that I would be happy to discuss it. And then we are seeing an increased winter rain and summer drought. The winter rain is responsible for the sediment delivered to Southern California. Absolutely. So absolutely, the more rain, the more sediment transport. However, in quantitative way, the droughts and rain need to be quantified to see their impact on the coastline, and that's the next step we hope to do in our proposal. So this is Jonathan. Thank you very much for your question, and if you have other questions, I'm happy to take. We have a question from Erica. Do you have example of geographies that have changed land use to allow upland sediment to reach the coast? Geographies that have changed the land use. So in the paper, which I will share in the chat, 1 minute, I share it with everybody in the chat here. You can see the change in the land use. Let me put it here. Okay, so I'm going to put it in the chat. And let me share that. Let me share the change in the land use we have. So basically, if you look to the figure number, I'm getting it close. Yes, so if you look to the figure number 4, you will see here the change in the land use between the urban areas and the sand deposit and the bare soils. So we lost a lot of the bare soil area between 1985 and 2015. And these bare soil area are the main pockets that help generate the sand and at the coastline. And so that was the case true for the Gulf of Santa Catalina, and it was also true for the analog location we study in Hammamat in Tunisia. And then also you will find in the paper, so the distribution of shoreline retreat due to sea level rise, the GSWE model, and the ZAS model, which also we share in the paper here. If that answers the question. So thank you. So here, David Ross, thank you for your presentation. Do you have any example in which a shore break has been moved offshore in order to slow beach erosion? I don't have any example in Southern California on that now. I am sure they might exist, but I did not look at that yet. My understanding from others is that the major impediment to sand transport is from dams up to watershed, which is true. These dams and soil capture devices are designated to capture soil so that the stormwater, and yes, so you analysis show that it's urbanization. Okay, so watershed are dammed. Okay, and this is, of course, it cut a big part of the sediments. However, the urbanization and the bare soil, they also contribute to minimize that amount of of uh, of uh, of transport to the coastline. Not all that the transport to the coastline is made from the main wadis that are in the watershed. There are other ones which are not any damp, and they contribute. And these ones is the ones we see their impacts too. So it is not. I just want to say here, it's not one or the others. Urbanization contribute in addition to damming, and in addition to other factors. So that's basically. So what I want to say that we should not think that damming is the only way by which we impede the sediment to reach the coastline. The degradation of the bare soils also contribute to that. The sediment transport does not only happen through the dam. The big part of it happened through the watershed, but other also happen through the small wadis that exist near the coastline and which are now are vegetated and urbanized and are cemented, as basically you can see in the figure number 1 in the paper. So I think this is most of the question. Trying to see if there are any ones.
Great.
Okay.
We have a comment in the chat. If anybody knows of examples which a shore break has been moved offshore or has been used to create a sandbar recontoured nearshore ocean bottom, to please contact David Ross. So thank you everyone for your comments and questions. I'll just make a quick last call for any last questions. But in the meantime, I'm going to pull up a quick mentee survey. So you can use your phone or your computer, and Dane will go ahead and put a link to that in the chat. But we just want to see what you all thought of this webinar so that we can plan our future webinars to correspond to what you all think of the programming. So feel free, you can use this code on your phone. Here's a QR code, or Dane will put the link in the chat that you can use on your computer. So just a quick 2 questions, if you wouldn't mind just filling this out for us. So our first question is, how would you rate today's session? I see some of you are already filling it out. And as you answer, if you could hit the little thumbs up just to show that you're done. So we have about 30 participants still, so I'll wait till that number of answers fills up a little bit more. But if anyone has any questions in the meantime, feel free to unmute yourself or ask them in the chat. But thank you to those of you who are filling out the Menti. And I'll leave this question up just for like another minute or two to give you all time to join the Menti and be able to answer. So thank you, Essam, as well, for a great presentation. I thought that was really informative. So thank you.
Many thanks for everyone. And I invite you to read the paper, which has more detail and better explained than my simplistic speech.
And we'll send out a follow-up email with the paper and the link to the YouTube video of this presentation. So yeah, thank you all for your responses. Let's